Yo, what's going on, everyone? Welcome to this week's special episode. This is our second preview for a league that we have never covered on the show. And I don't know much about La Liga outside of Real Madrid wins. Barcelona's broke, but seems to be able to buy everyone. Valencia is struggling. Sevilla is going to find some weird way how to win the Europa League. And why not have the great guy himself, Donald Wine, help us figure all this stuff out? How are you doing there, sir?
I'm good, man. It's good to be back on the show. Thanks for having me.
It's good, man. I think right now you got the record. I think you're at 3 appearances so far.
Cool. Stop. This is the last show. So
and the crazy thing is, all 3 have been about something different. So they let you know how great of an expert you are.
Yeah. Look, we got no more. You got no more guests after this. Like, you can bring me back, but every time I just gotta always. I keep track of who you bring on. I'm like, oh, he's been on a couple times. I need to.
That's the way it works, man. Well, look, man, it's a pleasure. It's always a pleasure to have you on. We're definitely talking about La Liga. What's going on this year? Real Madrid champions last year. Barcelona brought back the Xavi, but I don't understand how they're buying players. But we're going to talk about that and more. But dude, how's everything going on with you? Like, you got CONCACAF, the podcast going off. Mm-hmm. What are some things you're working on now, man?
Yeah, so I mean, we're coming up with another laser focus coming up, in the next couple of weeks. I know the United States women's national team, they have a couple of games coming up in September. One will be here. I live in DC, so we're really excited about that. And then, honestly, we're getting ready for the the Men's World Cup in November. That's obviously the big piece of pie that's going to be eaten this fall. And everything's kind of pointing towards that. The men will be abroad in October. The women will be abroad in October. And then the men will be abroad in September. So it's all looking towards that. And then just CONCACAF, everyone's kind of jockeying for position as we get ready for the World Cup, and even on the women's side for the Women's World Cup.
So, I'm going to ask a question, man. Are you going to be traveling to the World Cup? Are you going over there, or are you staying?
Yes. So I will be in Qatar for 2 weeks. I'll be there for the group stage and presumable, round of 16. If we make it, we'll, I'll watch a game. Otherwise, I'll still be there. But I turned 40 during the World Cup. So what better birthday present to myself than to go to the World Cup and I'll be watching, I believe it's France-Tunisia will be on my 40th birthday. So yeah, I'm looking forward to it.
That should be dope. Well, luckily some of your favorite players, some of your Real Madrid players will be over there as well. Let's talk about it, man. Last year made this improbable run to the UEFA Champions League, won La Liga. How did the season kind of go to plan for Real Madrid last year? Because I'm not going to lie, I did not expect them to win Champions League last year.
No, I mean, La Remontada is a real thing. La Remontada in Spanish is the comeback. And we had, as you know, so many comebacks during, every stage of Champions League. We were down entering, almost every single leg. Even when we were up against Chelsea scores 3 almost immediately against you in the second leg, and they have to come back from that. It was just magical. It's no better way to explain it other than it was just a magical season. Guys coming through in clutch moments, and this is why you have, these guys, right? This is why you have the roster you do, because you never know where that clutch gene is going to come from. You never know who is going to step up. And it was every single guy at one point stepped up. The timeless wonder, Modric with his pass, Rodrigo having 2 goals in, 2 minutes in one game, Vinny in the, Champions League final. It's amazing how many different guys, and just Benzema just being, what I think was a Ballon d'Or, player in the last year. Like, he dominated in every facet of the game over this past year. And if he doesn't get the Ballon d'Or, then they need to just cancel it, because he was a definite one. But I think that's the thing is with Real Madrid, that's why they bring all these stars in, is any given point, someone will step up and make a difference. And every game, it was a different hero.
Yeah, it was like Real Madrid had like a classic, like in round of 16. You're like, oh, like, did that take too much? And then the quarterfinals, it was another classic. Then the semifinal, that semifinal matchup myself, that second game against Man City, man. That's probably I probably put it in my top 5 Champions League games of all time.
Again, you know, it's just amazing that just in the span of 5 minutes, you know, Benzema is just like, okay, we're done playing around here. Let me just go ahead and bag 3 goals and let's get up out of here. And then you come back like the very next time again. You said, oh, maybe they don't have the juice. They've never won at Chelsea. They've never beaten Chelsea. They go to Chelsea in the first half. Benzema's like, hat trick, Rick. Let me do that again. And then, you know, having to hold off again, like another comeback from a team. It was just amazing to watch. And to do that, you know, people always look at the EPL, and I know you either will talk about or have talked about the EPL already, but everyone always says, oh, the EPLs every week there's always a classic game and everyone's fighting for relegation in the league, and there's all these games are important. I will stress to you that people need to open their eyes and understand that there is no team that has more pressure on their plate in the entire world than Real Madrid. Every single week, they are like Alabama facing, Missouri. Everyone gives them their best shot every single week, and they cannot take a week off, because if they even lose one game, it could cost them a trophy. It could cost them La Liga, and that's like the pace that they have to keep. You know, yeah, Man City and Liverpool, you know, they go back and forth for EPL, but every single person knows that the top of the heap is Real Madrid with all their trophies, and everyone is taking a gun on them. Even the rivals are taking a gun at them, because that is the pressure that Real Madrid seeks. And if they even draw, people freak out. Like that's where we're at. And so that is an amazing feat to not only win La Liga and having to deal with that every single week, but also the, you know, La Remontadas in the Champions League.
Yeah. And I think something else that's really interesting, I'm really happy for Carlo Ancelotti.
Yeah.
Because it seemed like once he left Real Madrid, and he didn't need to, and he went to Bayern, he went to Everton, it was kind of seemed like more or less people was kind of like, all right, we're going to slowly start pushing him out of retirement. Let's see if we can get him to the national team, whatever. And then he goes back to Real Madrid. And I remember the initial conversations about, oh, he left Everton to go to Real Madrid. Is Real Madrid just using this as a rebuild year? Or are they using this just as a buffer? And then out of nowhere, man, it is like this cool demeanor of his in which they able to breeze through La Liga, get to the Champions League. Has Carlo Ancelotti kind of not only rewritten his Real Madrid career, but also rewritten his career with winning those 2 trophies?
I mean, he was already a legend at Real Madrid. He was already a legend in the game of soccer, but he just added to that, you know, legacy. I think the thing about Carlo Ancelotti is that he is a player's coach. That was no more evident than this past season. I mean, the guys love him. They will do whatever they need to do, and they all accepted their roles because, you know, as you know, there's some players. We have a team with so many stars. Everyone wants to be the star. Everyone wants to be the alpha, and you can't have, you know, 25 alphas on a team. You have to have 1 or 2. You maybe have a couple of betas, and you have a couple of people who are role players and serve their role well. And he was able to get everybody on the same page, even with the rotations, with, you know, the short weeks, and, you know, the last 2 months of the season, seemed like they were playing 3 games a week because they were, you know, doing Champions League and La Liga. And he's like, I have to put out strong lineups every single time, but because you're not in the lineup doesn't mean you're not a strong player. Your number is going to get called, and you better be ready because we're going to need you. And everyone bought into that. And I think that's the best part of his legacy, is that now people are realizing, yo, there's a reason why he's, you know, made stops all over the world, all over Europe, really, and, you know, won all these trophies, is because he's a player's coach, and players will just play their backs out for him and just really go to the toe and really, you know, just shine under him. And he's brought so many players, you know, and made them shine underneath his tutelage. So it's really wonderful to see him be, you know, just enhance his legacy being back at the Bernabeu.
Yeah, it's good to see, man, because I wasn't liking to talk about my guy, man. Like, Carlo Ancelotti, for people who don't know, like, Carlo Ancelotti is probably one of the most swaggiest coaches. Like, I truly believe so Carlo can coach multiple sports and he can have success just because he's like, bro, I trust y'all. Like, just do y'all jobs.
Yeah. I mean, he and that's the thing, right? Like, you just mentioned it. You do your job. Like, this is what I need you to do. Are you cool with that? Because, you know, if you do this well, you won't have to worry about over here because this guy's going to do his job well. And then as a team, you guys are going to be successful, and you're going to leave yourself up for any trophy that you want. So that's the best part, is that those guys bought into that, and he was able to, as they say, manage a lot of egos in what is probably the biggest club in the world, and go in and say, hey, we're going for trophies here. And, no trophies are unacceptable, but we have the guys in this room that can do it. And everyone bought into that.
Yeah. And it seemed like a team that can't get right for no amount of sense whatsoever. See Barcelona, man. It's now, don't get me wrong. Like, on the field, I think a lot of people were excited to see Xavi come back and see the success that he had and everything like that. But it just seems as if, like, and I'll make the comparison, and hopefully you think I'm right about this. It seems as if, like, FC Barcelona are kind of in this LA Lakers, Man United state of, we don't want to say it's a rebuild because we want to look strong as possible. So instead of us fixing the problem the correct way, we're just going to put tape over a broken bridge and be like, hey, you can cross the bridge at your own cost.
Yeah, you know what? Here's a better way. This is what, of course, we always like to clown on Barca as Real Madrid fans. But when we talk about them, and comparing the two, clubs. Again, Barca, if you don't think Real Madrid is the biggest club in the world, you probably think Barca is. Like, they're 1 and 2, 1A, 1B, whatever you want to call it. They both had two of who will go down as two of the greatest players that ever played the game on their team, Ronaldo and Messi. The problem with Barca is that they have tied their entire existence to Messi. So now they're in that post-Messi world and they don't know who they are. Whereas the great thing about Real Madrid, at least in my eyes, is that when Ronaldo left, they said, okay, next man up. That was a great part of our history, and we will move on and keep it moving because we have to. We're the biggest club in the world. Right. So the problem with Barca is that they stacked all their chips into Messi, and now they're $1.4 billion €1.4 billion in debt, which is like a little less now because we got them on the dollar now. But they are that much in debt, and yet they're still signing players because they always wanted. They built themselves on being the next big thing, but all that debt was put into trying to build up a team around Lionel Messi. And when that piece was removed, they don't know how to stop the water from running down the drain. And this is their answer every single, last couple of years, is bringing in a bunch of guys saying, hey, look at this piece. They're the front piece. They're the piece that we're missing. And, as we see these 5 guys, 4 of them can't be registered because they haven't balanced their books. And that's something that happened last year too. Like Sergiño Dest almost couldn't go to Barcelona because they had to figure out a way to make sure the money going out was the same as the money coming in. And they were having trouble registering players last year too for La Liga. So it's a really tough situation that they're in. But in spite of that, they're still one of the best teams in the world. I hate saying that because, they're still going to fight for La Liga trophies. They're still going to fight for Champions League trophies because they have the talent there.
Yeah. And it's kind of just like, me as a history major, I always look like to compare eras. Mm-hmm. It feels as like Real Madrid, and we kind of go back and look at it. Like when Ronaldo left Real Madrid, you would have thought Real Madrid would be the ones be like, all right, we're going back to the Galacticos era. We're just going to like, who's the hottest star? We're going to put $100 million on him. And he felt like when Barcelona left Messi, it was like, okay, we got Gavi, we got all these guys coming to the academy. We're good to go. And it just seems as if like both teams kind of just flipped the roles to each other. Mm-hmm. And Real Madrid was just like, okay, we're going to trust not the youth, but we're going to trust the guys that we have here because we've been building them. Like they played the long game with Vinicius. They played the long game with Rodrigo. Where Barcelona was just sitting there like, all right, we got Pedri, we got Gavi, we got Guay, but let's go out here, let's spend $100 million on Lewandowski and all these other guys. Mm-hmm. And it just seems as if like they haven't invested smartly. Like it really seems as if ever since they lost Neymar, it's kind of like Barca just had. It's kind of like when you play FIFA and you got too much money, you're like, oh well, let me go out here and blow my team budget up. And then by the third game, you're like, I don't want to play this no more. Like, it's not fun.
So in that part, they kind of were like the old Miami Heat. back, like when LeBron and Bosch went there, right? They had Messi and they lost Neymar, which was one of their, their big three. And they're like, okay, we got to replace him. He can't be the big two. We can't be the big one. We got to be the big three. We got to be the big 10 or whatever they wanted it to be. And so they kept spending to try and bring on that next star who could compete with being the best in the world, but also next to Messi, right? Like they still had to defer to Messi at every point. And a lot of stars, again, you bring a lot of stars into a club. A lot of stars just don't want to do that, which is why you saw some guys go in and they kind of go, let me get up out of here. Neymar was that guy. Neymar, they thought was going to defer to Messi. And he was like, I want to be better than Messi. I want to be the best player on the planet. I can't do that here at Barcelona because I will always have to be second fiddle to Messi. And some guys, that's fine. But, when you look at some of these guys like Lewandowski should have won the Ballon d'Or in 2020, should have won it in 2021. And now he's going to be asked to carry an entire club because that is his stature. He's the biggest piece of the puzzle right now. And even when you have these guys like Pedri, who's ridiculous, Pedri's going to get run into the ground because every single competition that he plays in for club and country, they're going to play him because that's how they've treated him. So if he gets hurt, what happens? Ansu Fati, they lost him for 6 weeks and they fell into a rut because they didn't have anybody behind him because they couldn't sign anybody or they couldn't register him. So those are the issues that they face with this debt and just with this whole, I want to say just this conscience of they feel like they always have to be spending to be viewed as relevant. And I think that's the difference between them and what you see from Real Madrid, because you have to compare the two. Real Madrid's made 2 signings this summer, and one of them was a free. So that's their, the difference is you thought this thing was going to be flipped, but Barca just feels like they have to spend to spend.
Let me ask you this question when it comes to Barcelona, and let me say this: as a Real Madrid fan, I feel like you would not give a biased opinion, but do you think Barcelona gets to a point where they not only sold their TV rights, I think they sold TV rights, image rights,
their NFT rights and all that stuff.
Yeah, they're currently suing players because of illegal contracts that they made. Do you think Barcelona in the next 5 years are what Barcelona are now currently, or do you think there's gonna come a swan song moment of where they're gonna have to just let this pipe dream go of just spending money just for the sake of spending money?
It's going to be a little bit of both. Here's why. The reason why they're still able to spend, the reason why they're still able to quote unquote balance books and have all this money to sign players is because they still have a huge following in the biggest sector in most important sector in Spanish football, and that's the banks. It's the same thing with Real Madrid. Both of those two clubs, they get a lot of money from the TV deals. They get a lot of money from all the online rights because they've skewed it that way towards the bigger clubs. But at the same time, whenever they go to the bank and say, we need 25 million, we need 30 million, we'll pay you back, we swear, the banks give it to them. And in Spain, because that's part of the business too, of saying, yo, we helped Barca buy Lewandowski, we helped Barca buy Rafinha, like those type of guys. So yes, I think in theory, if that cord was unplugged and that well dried up, then yeah, they're going to have to start unloading a bunch of people and relying more on the academy and their Barcelona B team guys. But if they don't, they're going to keep spending because it's, like anyone else, right? If I say, yo, stop spending, and you go, okay, I won't spend no more, then I give you $100 million, you're going to spend it because that's your MO. And I'm enabling you by doing that. So as long as the banks are willing to give them the cash, they're going to keep spending it.
Okay. So it's kind of, I don't want to make a poor analogy, but it's kind of as if like you're giving your cousin that steals the ability to go to your house unmarked and just be like, hey, I'm watching you, but you're not really watching him.
Yeah, it's the cousin that's like, yo, they always have a business venture for you, and they always lose money or they always lose the business, but you still listen to them. You still go, yep, here's $1,000, here's 10,000. Like this one will be different. It's never different when it comes to Barca. I mean, even with Real Madrid, they're in debt quite a bit, but it's because they've renovated the Bernabeu. That's most of it. For Barca, a lot of it is tied up in they tried to build everything around Messi, and they paid Messi 140 million euros a year. Mm-hmm. And now that he's gone, they don't have as much to show for it as they thought they would.
Sure. Well, I hate to say this, but a club that's probably a club that doesn't get talked about as much, but is probably more crises than FC Barcelona is Valencia. And not only do we have another American Scarlet there in Musa, but I don't get it, man. Like, what was it, 20, almost 20 years ago? Valencia was at the crowning peak of La Liga. Like, they
Mm-hmm.
were the Atletico Madrid at that time. They was always in the conversation of
Yeah.
this team can challenge for Champions League, they can challenge for La Liga, they can win a Copa del Rey. And it just seems as if, like, ever since Peter Lim got in there, man, they just been going down and down and down and down. What's going on there?
I mean, a lot of that again has to do with money, and I think when it comes to some of these Spanish clubs, is they in an arms race to try and build up to kind of be. They're not necessarily challenging Real Madrid and Barca. They're not trying to, at least, but they're trying to make the most of what they can. They're kind of like, the Leicester Cities of the world, where they're like, hey, we can get some guys, but we're not trying. We're trying to get those middle tier guys. They're Big 12. They're a Big 12 school, right? They're not getting the five. They may pluck a couple 5 stars, but really they're just going after the 4s and 3s. They're trying to not compete with the bigs, but position themselves to kind of make the step up. But the problem is a lot of them got hit massively hard by the pandemic and the recession that ensued as a result. A lot of these guys needed help from banks to keep their wages afloat and keep paying players and staff. Valencia is one of those that got hit pretty hard from the COVID pandemic and just really the all out just recession that ensued as a result in Spain. So that's where a lot of it comes from. It's not necessarily the players that they're willing to get. It's just that sometimes they are more budget friendly and they try to get players that are within their budget. If their budget keeps going down, then they can only afford to get some of the lesser players. But having said that, they are one of the teams that is the best in Spain at making the most of what they have. The other one is Villarreal. Like those two, the two V's, if you put them in there, like Valencia, Villarreal, they are always going to have a strong team. They may not challenge for, titles, but, they're going to have a strong team, strong enough that if they can get to Europe, like Europa League, they're going to do some damage. And same with Villarreal. So Valencia is in that position where they're just going to try to make the most of what they got. But they do have some really good pieces, including Musa, who I think is poised to make a nice step up, very, very soon, especially this year. If he can have a breakout season this year, and by say breakout, I mean like stepping up from what he did last year for Valencia, then he's not going to be there much longer. And maybe they take him and flip him to another club. And that's a way for them to get some funds to kind of re-inject into their group.
I have 2 questions actually about that. Matter of fact, I'll start with the first one about Musa. Having them in a row, he's underneath Peter Gattuso now, who came from Italy. What is the next step for Musa? Because I felt like a lot of people mischaracterize him with what his role is. Because they look at him physically wise and be like, oh, you're a winger, you're a midfielder. But then the way how he plays within his role is a lot of like CDM, a lot of box to box. What is the true Musa in his best form?
That's a great question, because even with Valencia, he's played a lot. He's played center attack mid, and sometimes even played a false 9 for Valencia at times, and has done very, very well. I think that's part of his greatness. Why he's such a great, promising young player is that he has the versatility to adapt to different positions. But I like him kind of being in that box to box role for a club. Now, I don't necessarily think he would do that for the national team, because I think that positions is McKennie's to lose. But I also love the fact that they are able to complement each other when they're on the national team. Sometimes Musa goes forward and McKennie kind of falls back, and then vice versa with Adams kind of quarterbacking the whole thing. So, but I think him being in a box to box role really helps him get the ball. And he also in La Liga a lot of times is very open, so he's able to make some great runs with the ball, and again be able to distribute to guys who are making runs on the flank. So I think that's probably his best position. But Valencia is going to call him to do quite a bit of things, because they always have a lot of injuries. They have guys that play out of position all the time, and really when it comes down to it, like I said, if you're going to make the most of what you have, and if that have is very little, then you're going to have to ask guys to kind of stretch their job description, so to speak. So I think you're going to find him doing a lot of different things. But if, most of the time, if he's in that box-to-box role, I think that's the best place for him on the field for his club.
So I want to ask you this about Valencia, and this is another part of the question. Is Valencia comfortable in the role they have now? Not necessarily getting into Europe year in, year out, not challenging for La Liga. I don't let me change that. Not comfortable, but like, are they understanding of where they are at this moment of time of knowing that we can't go out here and spend 30, 40 million on a guy. We got to take that 30, 40 million, maybe sell 2 guys on our current roster, and then bring in 6 others and then build those up and then flip them. I imagine it's got to be hard for Valencia fans that, like I said, 20 years ago, were challenging for Champions League. It was a penalty kick away from winning it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think a lot of them look back to those glory days because they, as you mentioned, they weren't that long ago that they were doing that. It wasn't that long ago that they were competing for and winning Europa Leagues. And I think they want to get back to that. So the question for them, are they content with being where they are? Probably not. They want to be more consistent at qualifying for Europe, whether it be Champions League or Europa, and going from there and building that way, because with those competitions comes more money, which then they can reinvest into their squad. But if they're not in Europe, then they can't invest those resources. And like you said, they have to rely on hoping someone develops enough that someone will pay 30, 40 million for them, which is what happened, back in the, late 2000s. They had a bunch of guys that they had, where people like, yo, I'll pay 50 for them. And they were able to rebuild their squad by selling off players that ended up being very good and going to the bigger clubs. But I think they don't view themselves as the biggest club in Spain, but they view themselves as one of the bigger ones. They view themselves as one of the more successful, and they are. They need to get back to that level. They're just not. I don't think they're there yet.
Right. But a team that always seems to be there, and that no matter what, you can expect for them to make some
not
crazy
jerseys.
run.
They're not.
You can always expect for them to make some crazy run in either Champions League, Copa del Rey, La Liga. Don't expect all 3. It'll be one or the other. It's Atletico Madrid, man, and I gotta imagine, like, these guys are kind of like the ankle biters for you being a Real Madrid fan, but I asked for you to take off your Real Madrid hat, put on your La Liga hat. Speaking about this team, man, how do they do it year in and year out with Diego Simeone?
They have an injection of money. First of all, let's start with Diego Simeone. Diego Simeone is, save for Carlo Ancelotti, he's the best manager in Spain. Full stop. Like that. And he's been doing it consistently for, it seems like 20 years at this point. It's probably been a decade at this point. But he has been doing it consistently. Again, he's in that position where he has a club that does have a lot of money, that can spend a lot of money, but he does make the most of what he has. And if you think about some of these, players that have come in, they've recruited players. The Real Madrid goalkeeper started out getting his, chips by being at Atletico Madrid and being a star goalkeeper for them in Courtois before he went to Chelsea and then went to Real Madrid. So they have guys where they'll bring them in, they make them better, they sell them for more money or equal money, they go somewhere else, and then they play well. But when it comes to Atletico, they're always going to have at least enough money to challenge, like you said, for one of those things. They're not going to be, they're not going to be getting trebles out here, but they're going to basically play well enough that they're going to be in contention for La Liga. They're going to be in contention in Champions League. They'll, somehow screw it up somewhere along the line. And even Copa del Rey, they always seem to prioritize that over other competitions as well. And they do normally do fairly well in that as well. So, and they have the guys that can do that. They have a deeper squad than most in Spain. And again, a lot of great players, and they've had great players run through their system that have been stellar for them. And I think where they falter is they always seem like they're one guy short of whatever, right? Like of that pinnacle of, again, challenging for multiple trophies. They're putting all their nuts in one basket because they don't have that one guy that's going to change everything in every competition. But at the same time, they're moving into the Metropolitano. That's a 75,000 seat stadium. That revenue has really generated. They're sold out almost every single game. That has really helped re-energize the spending from this club. And again, they're going to be a team that when some of the biggest transfers are hitting the market, they're not all going to end up at Atletico, but Atletico at least has the money to get a few of them and at least throw their money at a few of them. They may not get them. And I think this offseason they were kind of shut out from those, but they're now at this point where people put their name in transfer rumors to kind of, pick up the price a little bit because people know that they got it.
Right. And let me ask you this about Real Madrid. Not Real Madrid, Atletico Madrid. God, too many Madrids. When I look at Atletico Madrid, I always associate them with either having like a legendary goalkeeper that eventually is like, oh, he's going to be the next one, or a legendary forward, like, oh, he's going to be the next one. In case of point, Sergio Aguero, David De Gea, Thibaut Courtois, John Oblak, Brandon Falcao. Is João Felix the next forward? Because it kind of felt like when he came from Benfica for the price that he did, I think it was roughly 80 million. We all assumed like, all right, 3-4 years time, he's going to be one of, if not one of the best forwards in the world. And it's kind of felt like he's kind of just hit like a ceiling.
Yeah, it has. That's where I mean by like one player short. Yeah. That, they spent, what was it, 70 million on him. And again, everybody's like, wow, he's going to Atleti. That's a big deal because he was being coveted by a lot of places and came in, showed very well, but he didn't show enough to be like, can he carry a team? Right? Yeah. Like every other team, like Real Madrid has 5 guys that can carry a team. Barca has 3 or 4 guys that can carry a team. Atleti, he was supposed to be the guy that carried that team to greatness. And even amongst the time when he came, I believe Griezmann was still on the team. I think Suarez was still on the team. They had just lost Falcao. They had a bunch of guys that could carry a team, but just they never quite got it, right? They never quite put it all together. And he's viewed as a disappointment in La Liga terms because of the price tag and the fact that I think they've only won 1 league, with him there. But again, you're like, when you said his name, like even me as someone who watches La Liga all the time, I had to remember like, oh, right, he is still on the team because he just disappears at several stretches. And for a guy of that stature, if you want to be on the world stage with the world's best, you can't disappear in games, whether they be big or small. You have to be there for all of them. And that's their issue, is some of their stars just clam up when the lights shine the brightest.
Yeah, it just definitely feels as if like if Atletico aren't playing the way how they want to play and the conditions they want to play, it's kind of just like we don't know. You kind of saw that last year in the Champions League. And I guarantee you, after this, we'll move on to our next topic. But you kind of saw that in the Champions League last year of how they were able to play their game against Manchester United, and then when they played City in the next round, it was like they got out of their comfort zone and they did not know how to react.
Night and day. And again, and it happened in times against Real Madrid and even against Barca where they're like, oh, yeah, big matchup, Madrid derby. And they come in and they be like, oh, they're rolling out their B lineup. And it's got who? It's got Valverde and Rodrigo and like guys that, again, who could like be in any other La Liga team and be the star. They're back. Atleti is a team that has to start their A lineup every single time. Otherwise, they're not going to, compete in all these leagues. They have to start their guys. If they start rotating, that's when they start faltering. And in this league, as I mentioned, if you falter, you're pretty much out of contention for at least the top prizes. You got to be, losing maybe twice, 3 times in a league is going to help put you in contention. But if you're losing, every other week because you're trying to rest your guys for Champions League or Copa del Rey, you're not going to have the guns to box with everybody.
Yeah, it definitely seems like that. So before we move on, let's talk about some of these other teams in La Liga. Teams that doesn't really get the cachet or the love that EPL lesser known teams like a West Ham get. Real Sociedad, Celta Vigo, Sevilla, Real Betis. These teams here, they not only qualify for Europe, but Real Betis winning Copa del Rey last year. I feel like that group of 4 is like they're that next group to kind of challenge. It's definitely the case of Sevilla getting in the Champions League or Villarreal winning the Europa League. What does it take for that group right there to challenge into that next group and be consistent contenders?
Consistency. That's the answer right there. is every year there's always one team that can pop up and do something. Villarreal has won, won Europa. Sevilla, as you mentioned, anytime they get into Europa, they end up winning the thing. They've won like 5 of them. They're just killer. They just kill everybody on the Europe stage. But at the same time, again, they're resting people in the league because they know they can't compete in both. They're just like, hey, we'll go over here, and then they end up falling out of position where they can't go back to the competition, save for them winning. So it makes it where the consistency is gone. And Real Sociedad had a great year last year. We don't know what's going to happen to them this year. Bilbao was always fairly consistent, but they're always just fairly consistent like just on the outside looking in. But they have 2 dope players, like Iñaki Williams. If you have not watched him play, he is dope. And his brother Nico was just maybe better over the long run. But like they just have, and there's just how they set their club up where no players have come from outside of Basque Country ever. Like that is a huge deal for them. They've been able to be consistently decent and then sometimes challenge for certain things. But in the end of the day, these teams, they know that they don't have the depth to challenge for, the top 4 all the time or challenge for your European positioning all the time. So they have to pick and choose when they can go for it. And I think that's their only thing. But I mean, this year, Sevilla is probably the best poised to do it because they are in Champions League and they're going to, again, get that influx of cash. And then also Villarreal, who, again, always seems to overperform on the European stage. And when you think about it, all these weeks, like all this inconsistency that they do have makes it where they put, they challenge really hard for it. So, and that's why you've seen over the last 20 years, I believe more than half of the European winners, Champions League and Europa, and we'll count for sake of example, the Conference League that just started last year, half of those winners, almost more than half of those winners have come from La Liga because they understand what it's like to, hey, we just got to focus on this. And, they're getting challenges every single week in La Liga and people just don't want to realize it because it's not the Premier League. But some of these teams are really, really good. They just
you're absolutely right about that. Like I was talking to Jake about that last week in reference to the Bundesliga, where it feels as if teams are now starting to realize like we don't have to build our team to beat Bayern and Dortmund. We have to build our team to compete. And as we saw with Eintracht Frankfurt and winning the Europa League, I feel like La Liga kind of realized that maybe during the Pep Guardiola years of like, we're not touching this. And they definitely realized that when Real Madrid won 3 back-to-back Champions League, like, we're not touching this. So let's build our teams to compete in the Copa del Rey and these European competitions. And if we can challenge in La Liga, hey, so be it. I feel like there's certain tiers in La Liga, and correct me if I'm wrong in this. I feel like there's 2 teams that can challenge on all 3 fronts, and that's Real Madrid and Barcelona. Then you have Atletico that can challenge on 2 fronts by themselves. And then like we have that group of 5 of Athletic Bilbao, Valencia out there in there, Sevilla, Real Sociedad, Real Betis, and Celta Vigo that can challenge on 1 front. And then everyone else below that is kind of like, we're doing what we can to not get relegated. Is that fair to say?
I would even say Villarreal would be there ahead of like Celta Vigo or even Real Sociedad. Real Sociedad was like a surprise last year for how well they did. And I think, again, there will be teams who kind of like, sit there, hover at 10th or 11th, and then push up to be in Europe one year or be in Europa. And then that next year, again, they just don't have the consistency and they fall back down. It's a really up. And so if you're not one of those first like 4 or 5 teams that you mentioned, every year is like, what team are we going to get? Because every week you're saying what team we're going to get. Because like you said, they're not challenging themselves. They're not building themselves to beat Real Madrid and Barca. They're challenging themselves and building themselves to beat Cologne. Sorry, Jake, homie. Like they're trying to beat other leagues in these European competitions, basically to kind of say like, yeah, you may not think much of La Liga, but we just beat you. We just beat this other team in England. We just beat this other team in Italy. And so that is how the league kind of promotes its strength, is through the European competitions. But in the best part about it from a league standpoint is that every year, save for, Real Madrid, Barca, and Atletico, it's sometimes 2, 3, 4 new teams that come in and everybody goes, "What? Who is this? Who is this team beating us?" That's the special part of La Liga, is that any team in any given year can step up and do something great. But as a whole, they all need the consistency to continue to do it every single season.
Right. I feel like that's the biggest thing that you've been throwing out, is just that consistency factor of these teams that are kind of outside of that 4 or 5 group echelon of like, just be consistent. It's kind of like the same thing. Kind of the same thing we say here in America about soccer here, like, just be consistent. As long as you're consistent and making strides, it's a win sometimes for these teams. It's not all about winning the trophies. It's about, can you make it to the next year? Can you make it to the end of your 5-year plan? And then after that 5-year plan, can you then go and make the next 5-year plan? And then that's what it felt like it is. Matt, let's go ahead. Let's get your predictions. This is the fun part of the show. So you kind of let your hair down a little bit. This is the fun part of the show. I want to hear, man, who's your La Liga winner? Who's your top 4? Who's getting relegated? And who's getting promoted?
Ooh, that's a good question. There's all good questions. I'll start with what I think is the easiest one. And this is me taking my Real Madrid hat off and letting you know that I'm going to put it back on because they're going to win the league. I honestly think they're the best team in the league. I think that if they apply themselves to the league, they're going to win it. And I think all these other, Barca and Atletico and even Athletic Bilbao, who, again, had a challenge until the end of the year, I think they just don't have the horses to compete. So I think Real Madrid does end up winning La Liga. I think top 4 will be, Barca will be there. I think Atleti will be there. I'm sorry, Atletico, Madrid. And I think, you know what? It's hard to predict the next one. I'm just going to say Athletic Bilbao. I think, again, this might be the year that they finally put together. I think they go as far as the Williams brothers can take them. And they have some other guys that are really good, but there was a point where Iñaki was kind of scoring every single week. And it was ridiculous how he was able to realize that he can carry a team. And if he realizes that for a whole season, then the whole league is in trouble. So I will put them into the top 4.
Okay.
So you said relegated. Relegated. I look at some of these teams, and there's a couple that I think kind of overproduced. And I think there's some that kind of are here for, as they say, a cup of coffee. The team that I thought that overproduced the most last year was Elche. Elche was 13th, but basically every other time they've been promoted into La Liga, they get dropped right back down the next year. They're not a big club, and I don't think they are going to really, have the success that they had last year in staying up. So that's one. I think 2 will be Valladolid. They just got promoted up. It's always one that goes back down. And here's the other one. This is the interesting one. Last year, on the last day of the season, we had Cadiz, who was basically on the outside looking in. They were about to be relegated. They scored 2 late goals to pull ahead and stay up and be 17th. I don't think that's going to happen to them this year. I think they're going to, really suffer. They've tried to reload, but I think in the end it's going to be a little too much, and they will be the 3rd team that gets relegated.
Oh, okay. All right. Promoted. Who you think gets promoted out of the league?
Promoted. That might be the bigger question. Because there are some teams that are really, really good. And I think in the end, the one team that I'm just going to put my fan hat back on. The one team I want to see promoted is Malaga. Malaga made the drop last year. It was the first time in a long, long time that they had dropped. And Malaga is severely underrated as a city. As the people there are great. The team there is something everyone gets behind. La Rosaleda is a really, really awesome, just cathedral of soccer. I hope they make it back. So I'm just going to put the hope factor back in there. And I'm going to say that they are one of them. Levante, I think, is one team that I think will also make it back out. And I think the one team that kind of bounces back and forth, but they figure out a way to get back, is Eibar. They're very, very, they're a tiny team. But somehow they make it work, and I think they're the ones that just on maybe the last of the promotion or whatever, on the last day of the season, they're the ones that get the boost.
Okay. I'm glad you said Malaga because last year I was keeping an eye on them because I keep an eye on them and Deportivo La Coruña.
Yeah.
And I think Malaga was closer to getting relegated last year than even being close. Like it was like, yo, they can really go down. And I was like hoping
they were not happy because again, Cadiz when they scored, it was at basically that their goal sent Malaga down, and that was, I mean, Malaga was holding on strong, and then all of a sudden I believe they fell behind in their game, but they still were cool as long as Cadiz didn't score, and then Cadiz scores, and it was literally reminiscent of Leeds, what they did in the EPL, where Leeds had that like 91st minute goal that kept them up, but also sent someone down. It was that sort of symmetry where as soon as something happened, like the very next minute, Cadiz scored, and it was just like you see the live standing just shuffle like a deck of cards.
It's always the best part of the season. Last question I ask you about this topic, man, before we kind of wrap up is I ask Jake these questions. I'll ask every question, but Champions League, Europa League, Europa Conference League. What's going to be the easier competition for a Spanish team to win this year?
The easiest one is going to be Europa because they always seem to win Europa. I think that's always been the one where the path of least resistance, because again, even if a team crashes out of Champions League, they get to go down to Europa, and usually Spain has, if they don't have 4 teams in the knockout stages of Champions League, they have 4 teams in the knockout stages of Europa. And from there, usually when that happens, usually one of them makes the final, and if it's Sevilla, then they end up winning it. So I think that's the easy answer is Europa is probably the one that's most set up for a Spanish team to win. Mm-hmm. But I mean, I got Real Madrid as one of the favorites for Champions League to defend their title. They didn't add much, but they've still remained pretty strong. So the question for them is there's just so many great teams in Europe who's going to step up, and will that magic run out for them? But the Europa League is set up for Spanish teams to win because the bigger teams in the Bundesliga and EPL and Serie A don't necessarily take Europa seriously. And Spanish teams, like I said, the league basically puts an emphasis on Europa and doing great things out of that competition. So
right. Well, man, I want to say thank you so much. It's been a pleasure to have you on, my guy. I felt like this conversation we could have kept talking about this for like 3 hours.
Yeah. I love talking with you, about just soccer in general, but La Liga is a very, very, just an incredible league. I wish more people will watch it. It's on ESPN Plus. It's easy to tune in when you're watching Bundesliga. Those are the 2 leagues that I watch the most because ESPN Plus is so easy to access. So
same here.
Yeah,
it's that USL Championship or USL League One, I'm checking out Bundesliga. I'm checking
tune on Saturday mornings in the fall at 8:30 in the morning. And I can, I have the Apple Plus where it has 4, I can put 4 games on my TV from 9 o'clock until midnight. And it's all because of the Bundesliga and La Liga, and then translate that into MLS and USL League One, or USL and USL League One. And then, even late at night, there'll be some Aussie game on or something. There's always, soccer to watch on that platform. I if you don't have it, it's easily the best of the streaming services as far as from bang for your buck perspective. So definitely check out La Liga. It's a great league to watch, and you're just gonna see a lot of great players that you may, again, people may think, oh, these teams aren't that great. It's a 2-horse league, but there's a lot of great soccer that's played in this league, and so I hope people watch it.
Right. Well, with that being said, man, where can everyone check you out? Check out your amazing work. By the way, you got to promote this CONCACAF podcast, dude, because it is hot fire.
Yeah, so the World of CONCACAF podcast, my buddy Eric and Jonathan and we started that, and it talks about exactly that, CONCACAF. Really, we focus in almost every other episode on a particular country and all the soccer culture and culture in general. And even if we've traveled to there for a game, we talk about the country and the life there and the people. It's great. It's called World of CONCACAF Podcast. You can find that on Twitter, Instagram at PodCACAF. PODCACAF. And you can find me on Twitter and Instagram at BlazinDW. Always talking soccer, always talking college basketball, always talking life. I chime in on as much as I can when I can. So, and then also Stars and Stripes FC. That podcast is, I took a summer hiatus just to kind of recharge, but that's coming back very soon. Of course, it's going to be a very busy fall on the U.S. front for both the men and the women. We're ready for it.
Right. Rightfully so, man. Well, as always, listeners, we want to say thank you for taking time out of your day for listening to our show, because without you, we couldn't do this show. So remember, you can follow us at CIKIFC on Twitter and on Instagram. With that being said, we will holler at you guys next time.